Yes, sir.
Yes.
Great.
So can we start? What do, yeah, right?
Yes.
Okay, I start.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Well, this presentation is called Obviation Effects within Spanish pseudo-relative clauses. As far as we know, it hasn't recognized in the literature that pseudo-relatives trigger obviation effects. So this is our observation here in this presentation. I can. As you may know, perception verbs in combination with an NP in Spanish, and I think in most Romance languages, may receive different classes of additional embedded clauses. For example, gerundial, like 1A, Ana vio a Juan cayendo al piso, so this falling to the ground. Participial, like caído en el piso, Ana vio a Juan caído en el piso, fallen into the ground. Infinitive, like caer al piso, to fall to the ground. And pseudo-relatives, which are a special case of finite clause. So we can have something like Ana vio a Juan que caía al piso, something like Ana saw a direct object marking Juan that fell to the ground. So Juan is the guy that is falling to the ground. This NP Juan that appears in all sentences in one has all the characteristic or all the properties of direct objects. It bears the DOM marker A, which is which appears always with animate arguments, and it may be replaced or doubled by an accusative pronoun, such as this lo, which is the accusative masculine singular clitic. A Juan Ana lo vio cayendo al piso. A Juan Ana lo vio caído en el piso. So all these sentences, and the same with pseudo-relatives. A Juan Ana lo vio que caía al piso. So this Juan behaved in all cases like an direct object. However, there is an unexpected behavior with pseudo-relatives, because we can passivize this Juan argument when we have a gerundial, a participial, and an infinitive clause, like in 3A, 3B, and 3C, but we cannot say something, and this, as far as we are aware, it hasn't been noticed in the literature. In Spanish, we cannot say something like Juan fue visto que caía al piso, so we cannot passivize the Juan argument when we have a pseudo-relative. So what is the goal with this presentation? We want to approach the following question, that is, why are pseudo-relatives in Spanish incompatible with passives? And our thesis is that there is no special structural ban on passivization in sentences with pseudo-relatives, but ungrammatically seems to emerge as a consequence of an obviation effect. That is something with an antilogophoric relation with the matrix clause, and this obviation effects voids coreference between the subject of the main clause and the embedded clause. In context of Spanish direct perception verbs, we will focus on direct perception verbs. So this is the overall structure of our presentation. We have already made the introduction. We will do an overall characterization of pseudo-relatives, which about their context of appearance and which coreference patterns we can find. Then we will defend pseudo-relatives as completives, as CPs, not as relatives, but as completives. And we will defend that pseudo-relatives trigger obviation effects, and we will show that this is the case and that pseudo-relatives seem to behave like other obviation environments in Spanish, like subjunctive clauses, imperatives, and object control structures. And so then we will do the final remarks. This is the first presentation where are both authors, so we will have a vehicle change. Pablo will start speaking in the middle of the presentation. So pseudo-relatives are present in a number of languages, not only in Spanish, they are present also in Catalan, in French and Italian, among other languages. But the crucial thing here, which is the incompatibility with passives, does not occur in all these languages. For example, does not occur, as far as we know, in Italian. For this reason, we will focus on Spanish especially, but we will leave open the possibility of extending our findings to other languages as well, and to see what happened and to compare with what happened in other languages. So the relatives are attested in different syntactic environments. Apart from perception verbs, they can appear in copulative structure, in psychological predicates, etc., etc. But we will focus here on pseudo-relatives in the context of perception verbs like to see, ver, and to hear, escuchar, which is the most studied environments in the literature. Literature agrees that pseudo-relatives are in essence object control structure. For example, here in 4, Ana vio a Juan que caía al piso. This Juan is the controller and controls the pro within the pseudo-relative, which is this clause que caía al piso. But this control may be established either with an embedded pro in subject position, in the subject position of the embedded clause, or also with an embedded accusative, like we can see in B, vi a Juan que lo golpeaban sin piedad. Some people beat Juan without mercy, so we have here co-reference between the object clitic and in 4C with the dative clitic. This is permitted as long as certain conditions are met. For example, that there has not, it is needed that there is no other salient argument, for example, a subject with referential reading interpretation before the clitic or something like that. We have here an arbitrary pro here. This is an impersonal sentence. For the sake of simplicity, we will focus here on embedded subject, but everything we will tell here work exactly the same for dative clitics and accusative clitics. We will show some examples, but we will focus on embedded subjects. An important property of pseudo-relatives with these perception verbs is their mandatory direct perception interpretation. That is, Spanish, as you can see in 5A, in Spanish, complement clauses to perception verbs are compatible both with direct perception and an epistemic reading. So we can say something like, vi que María estaba de regreso, saw that Maria was back. And we can add a cause like given that her car was in the garage, and that let us know that we didn't see Maria back, but we are inferring that Maria was back. So this so verb is compatible with the direct perception without this causal, or with this causal, there is an interpretation that we are inferring that she is back, given that we are seeing her car, not her. But when we have a pseudo-relative one, like in 5b, vi a María que estaba de regreso, we cannot add a cause that let us know that this is an inference. So only the physical direct interpretation that we are seeing María back is available, only that. Many authors agree that pseudo-relatives are completives and not relatives, despite their name. Next, we will address 4 arguments in favor of this position. Some of them are standard in the literature, but we will add another argument that is not, as far as we know, it has not been observed in the literature before. The first one is that relatives cannot appear with proper nouns or with pronouns. We can say with type E expressions. For example, María compró el libro que le recomendé. María bought the book which I recommended, or that I recommended. That is fine, but if we put a proper noun like ficciones, the name of a book, Mariana compró ficciones que le recomendé, that is not grammatical, and Mariana la saludó a ella, to her, that lives in Tucumán, that is not grammatical, but pseudo-relatives are allowed in that context. For example, we can say Mariana vio a Pedro que lloraba, Mariana saw Pedro that cry, and Mariana lo vio with a clitic, a pronoun, que lloraba, that is perfectly fine with pseudo-relatives. Also, pseudo-relatives as opposed to relatives, to antecedents of relatives, may be pronominalized independently. For example, we can say, conozco al muchacho que habla con su novia, so que habla con su novia, that talk with his girlfriend is the relative, but we cannot take al muchacho, the boy, and pronominalizing it independently of the relative. That's ungrammatical, but we can do that with with pseudo-relative. Vi a José que hablaba con su novia, so José that talked with his girlfriend. Lo vi que hablaba con su novia, so a José, we are replacing a José here for by the clitic, the accusative clitic. Now Pablo will continue.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Well, our next argument is related with the tense defectivity of pseudo-relative clauses. In this case, we rather prefer to use an example, the verb imagine, rather than to see, because it is clearer the differences with respect to tenses. For instance, in 10a, imaginé a Juan que leía un libro, but it's ungrammatical with other tenses like imaginé a Juan que lee un libro, or imaginé a Juan que leerá un libro. I mean that he will read a book. We see instead, you can move this block. I can see you have a black.
Yeah, it would be nice. Yes. Yeah.
So you come back one.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. You see in 10b that the relative clause allows any tense. Imaginé a la persona que leyó mis cartas, imaginé a la persona que leía mis cartas, imaginé a la persona que lee mis cartas. Imagina una persona que leerá mis cartas. In every case, the relative clause allows any tense with independence of the matrix sense. In the same happens with a complement clause like in tense C. Imaginé que Juan leyó, leía, lee, leerá un libro. You can see that the contrast between 10 and C is stark. So that is a very known observation, but our new observation is that so the relative clauses also are mode dependent. So in 10, we see if that if the main verb is indicative, sorry, if the main verb is declarative, the embedded clause also have to be declarative. So you can, if you say, vi al bebé que mojó el pañal, but you cannot make the question, ¿viste al bebé que mojó el pañal? With the pseudo-relative reading. With the relative reading, it's okay, but with the pseudo-relative, it's ungrammatical. Instead,
5 minutes.
Oh, instead, we can see in 12 that if you make a question, so you can also insert the interrogative complementizer C into the main clause. So you cannot say vi al bebé si él mojó el pañal, but instead you say ¿viste el bebé si mojó el pañal? So in this case, the interrogative C depends of the interrogative mood of the entire clause. So to the extent that C is not a possible introductor for a relative in Spanish, this is kind of problematic for some proposals, like such as one presented by Bruckart 99, that state that several relatives are a kind of predicative relative. In that case, this data is totally unexpected. From this argument for the tense defectivity and mood defectivity is it follows that the relatives are in some way defective CPs. Now we come back to our starting problem. No? Why passive are incompatible with pseudo relatives? So why can't we say Juan fue visto que caía al piso? No? We will show that this one is due to an aggregation effect. So our first argument is that the same kind of ungrammaticality appears in other cases of balance changing operations. So in 14a, is it possible to see that the case of a passive, Juan fue visto que leía un libro, is ungrammatical, but also it's ungrammatical with reflexive C, Juan se vio a sí mismo que leía un libro, and with the passive C, se escucharon abogados que protestaban en el juzgado. All these examples are ungrammatical. Instead, well, the same holds for the cases with objects, ¿no? Juan fue visto que lo golpearon, o Juan se vio a sí mismo que lo golpearon. Instead, if it participates with impersonal C construction, no ungrammaticality arises. So, se ve a Juan que lee un libro, o se ve a Juan que lo golpean. In both cases, these sentences are grammatical. No? Other piece of evidence is that perception verbs in their direct perception interpretation also trigger obviation effect when combined with the complement CP. Juan vio que Juan vio que golpeó a Pedro. Is ungrammatical with the reading in which the matrix subject is co-referential with the embedded subject. The embedded subject only must be disjoint with respect to the matrix subject. This is interesting because verbs like C differ with respect to other verbs that take complement CP as a direct object. No, that for instance in 18, Juan piensa, dijo, sabe que insultó a Pedro. So, but in this case, it is not possible with a overt subject. Juan piensa, dijo, sabe que él insultó a Pedro. This is a classic contrast between null and overt subjects due to Montalbetti's dissertation. Montalbetti also noticed that the explicit subject of embedded classes cannot be bound by quantifiers. So algunos estudiantes creen que ellos son inteligentes. It's grammatical, perdón, it's ungrammatical, but algunos estudiantes creen que son inteligentes. It's perfectly ungrammatical. And you can see the same with other quantifiers in 19. So we have the same effect, no, in these cases, but when the pseudo relative. I just mentioned the first one. Vio a todo profesor que corregía los parciales. It's ungrammatical on the pseudo relative reading, and you can see in 20 that different type of quantifier and P are ungrammatical as antecedent of the pseudo relative. So in this sense, pseudo relative behave with respect to quantification the same way as explicit subject of embedded clauses in no-substance language, which is known to be the context in which obviation effects arises. So our last point is that we can see it in object control in control construction. So in the infinitive clause in 21, Pedro quiere leer un libro. The embedded subject, as is well known, have to be mandatory co-referential with the matrix subject. But in 21b, in the substantive clauses, triggers an obviation effect. Pedro quiere que lea un libro. The embedded subject cannot be co-referenced with the matrix subject. When object control structures like 22, we find a different pattern because no obviation effect arises with respect to the object. So in 20b, Pedro forzó a Juan a que lea un libro. The embedded subject can be co-referential with the matrix object. So we see that in these cases are also ungrammatical, no, with all the balance change operations that we see before. So it is incompatible with the periphrastic passive in 23A, with the reflexive C in 23B, with the passive C in 23C, but is perfectly grammatical with impersonal C in 23D. Se forzó a Juan a que lea un libro. Is perfect. So the dissimilarity with object control configurations suggests that, again, that obviation is at play in pseudo relatives. So our final remark. So in this presentation, we observe that pseudo relatives do not support passivization. We defended the view that this incompatibility is due to the obviation effect triggered by the combination of direct perception verbs with finite clauses. This effect extends also to the impossibility of reflexivization and passive se, but crucially not to impersonal se. In this respect, the silent argument of pseudo-relative behaves as an explicit subject of propositional complement and subject of subjective object contrary clauses. Our final remark is that if our observations are on the right track, the data may shed some light on other contexts that have been described in the literature as triggering objection effects such as subjective clauses and imperatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We have
time.
Yeah, we have time for, we have 3 minutes. So
Okay.
Andres has a question. So go ahead, Andres.
Me? I didn't write my hand.
Okay. No worries.
But I can do a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, but you're
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So Pablo and Fernando, I don't agree with the data with Montalbetti effects in with quantifiers at all. And we are from the same neighborhood. So I don't think that this is a dialectical variation or something. But for me, if you say, vi a tres, ¿cómo era? Juan vio a 3 abogados que estaban no sé cuánto, that's perfectly fine for me.
See, but as a relative.
No. With the relevant reading.
Yeah.
No, not this one. In the pseudo-relative cases. This one. Vio a algunos profesores que corregían los parciales. For me, it's perfect. Los vio que corregían algunos parciales. Yeah, that's. I don't share the intuition here. O vio a 5 profesores que corregían los parciales. That's good for me.
With a pseudo-relative reading.
No,
So
with the pseudo-relative reading, of course, yeah. You can pronominalize, you can say, los vio que corregían los parciales. Yeah.
los vio a algunos profesores que corregían los parciales. Can you say that?
That's also good, yeah.
For me, it's a bit strange, but it's ungrammatical. But
Yeah.
Which
We
one?
have discussed
Well, because you have a clitic doubling with an indefinite, but
yeah.
it's not. This is a confounding factor. But for me, the C, D, E, and F are good. No. F.
Okay. Well, we have discussed it. So I had a contrast also between A, B, C, and D, E, F. So it is not entirely clear for me that the indefinite ungrammatical, but the case of the universal quantifiers for me are bad.
Well, I don't know. For me, 20C is good also. Cada and todo are out. The 20E and B. But just a data, I mean, it's a disagreement on judgment. I don't know if you test it with other speakers. Because for me, it's clear. I mean, it's a sharp contrast. You know, something that, oh, I have to think. No, it's perfect. That's what surprised me.
Yeah, if I may add, I also agree with Andres' judgments of those examples. For me, they are perfectly fine. And I would add that the example by Montalbetti with the difference between null subjects and the overt pronoun el, if you, that one in 18. So again, in my variety, if I put a special emphasis on the overt pronoun, the sentence is perfect.
Okay.
So if you focalize, for example, the pronoun.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, in a pseudo relative, you can also have it, for example, Juan vio a Pedro que él mismo cocinaba. No, I think that you can have it, but not.
Okay, so Cilene, do you have a question? But I don't think that we have. It's a very short one.
25 seconds. I think it's worth comparing this with nominalizations to see if it's a type of nominalization. Maybe looking at this, you know, Frank and Kroc has a very interesting paper on post-ing gerunds, and it might be worth looking at the paper and applying the test that they are doing there to this. I mean, it could be that this pseudo clause this pseudo relative is a nominalized clause with raising of the object. I don't know. It reminds me a little bit, you know, of sentential nominalization.
Yeah. It is hard to us to think that this is like a complex DP structure because it seems that the antecedent of the pseudo relative behaves as through the direct object. You can make extraction, so you can questioning. ¿A quién vio Juan que golpeó a Pedro?
Yeah, but I think, you know, that's the great thing about it, because Frank and Kroc, they show a lot of evidence that post-INGs, at least in English, post-ING gerunds are not DPs.
Ah, okay.
You know what I mean? So it's a cool thing to see that what we're calling sentential nominalization might not really be nominalization.
Thank you.
Like comparing with the.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And now we have Giorgio Carella from University of Roma, Mara Frascarelli, University of Roma, and Marco Casentini. Probably my Italian is not that. Are you there? Yes, you are.
Yes.
Good.
Yes, we are.
So who is going to be the co-host?
Giorgio
I am.
Oh, you are
Giorgio.
already?
I don't know if I'm already.
Isabella, could you make him co-host?
Yes, already done.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I will say 5 minutes when you are 5 minutes to be 20 minutes. Okay?
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay,
Did
good.
full screen?
Yes, it's good. It's
Okay.
fine.
Perfect.
Okay, so can you hear me? Can I start?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
okay. Okay, thanks. So as you can see in the title, this presentation focuses on focus. And in particular, the main goal of this research is to identify the syntactic properties of 3 focus types in Italian. That is to say, information, corrective, and mirative focus. And the research aims to verify whether and to what extent different focus types can occur in different syntactic positions, delving into in situ, fronted root, and fronted embedded positions. So this means that in this talk, we are dealing with the long-standing and vexed question of optionality of focus fronting. As you can see, as you can, obviously know, focus can be moved, can be fronted in many languages for different types of foci. But crucially, this fronting is very often optional. And optionality, of course, is a problem in a theory of grammar that wants movement to be triggered by morphological requirements, interpretive requirements. And so it is a problem to consider what kind of feature it can be that requires a movement just optionally. So we wanted to see if it depends on the position with different metric verbs, concentrating on verb of saying, distinguishing root-like and non-root-like context, emotive-active verbs, and desiderative verbs. Thanks, George. So the notion of focus is very well known, I think, by everybody. It correlates with main sentence stress and evokes a set of alternatives to the ordinary denotation of a constituent containing the focus itself. So it means that the focus semantic value of a sentence like Mary, like Sue, where Mary is the focus, is the set of proposition of the form X, like Sue, where X belongs to the domain of individuals. And thanks, Giorgio. In particular, information focus conveys new non-presupposed information without expressing exhaustive identification. This is very important in Kish 98. And as a diagnostic, the focus element is the element that provides a value for the undefined entity contained in a WH question, as the one that you can see in 1. As for corrective focus, Bianchi and Bocci argue that it corresponds to a specific use of contrastive focus because it is a complex conversational move which involves the denial of a previously asserted proposition and the assertion of a distinct proposition. So it means when we have a sentence like to A and B, in B it's not only Marina that has been replaced by Julia, but it signals that the whole proposition expressed by the corrective claim is incompatible with one salient alternative proposition that is completely replaced. Finally, as far as mutative focus is concerned, it conveys that there is at least one member of the set of alternative proposition which is more likely than the asserted proposition. So when a sentence like 3 is uttered, this means that there is at least one focus alternative which is more likely than the asserted one with respect to the normal course of events in the world of evaluation. This means that it is an opinion of the speaker and it is put, so as to say, on the table. Of course, it can also be rejected by interlocutor if the interlocutor thinks that to give a necklace of pearls as a present is commonly normal. So as for the root non-root distinction, Emmons in the 70s said that root sentence is a root that is a sentence that is not dominated by any other node than the sentence itself, and root transformations are structural operations that modify the original syntactic structure of a sentence and are restricted to root sentences. Crucially, Emmons says that root transformation cannot occur in embedded clauses, but Hoover and Thompson in 73 argued that root transformation can operate in root and root-like embedded clauses. And in particular, we learned that they are restricted to clauses endowed with assertive force. However, Haycock in 2006 shows that a fully operational definition of assertion is not available. And Bianchi and Frascarelli 2010 also showed that some root-like clauses are not properly asserted by the speaker, for instance, belief reports. And they propose to take another perspective, an interface perspective, and propose the interface root restriction, according to which information structure phenomena that affect the conversational dynamics must occur in clauses endowed with elocutionary force that implement a conversational move. Given all this picture, it is also very important to consider Farkas 2003 distinction of a typology of different complement clauses and based on two semantic characteristics, that is asserted and decided. And the clause is asserted if the context is updated with its propositional content, and it's decided if its propositional content is already included in the context. So we can now classify complement clauses saying that verbs of saying in a root-like context are asserted but not decided. That is to say, only the embedded clause is a tissue in the context. The verb of saying in non-root-like contexts are also asserted and not decided, but this time both the matrix and the embedded clause are a tissue in the context. Emotive active verbs are not asserted and decided because they are presupposed, and deciderative verbs are not asserted and not decided. Given this picture, we designed an acceptability test, and at this point, I leave the word to Marco. Please.
Thank you. Okay, so can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, in order to check whether there is any correlation between the type of focus or the matrix verbs and the position of the focus constituents, we did an acceptability judgment task, which was submitted to 120 Italian native speakers, all of them of the Roman variety, which were asked to judge target sentences on a Likert scale from 0 to 10 to 100. So the test was designed with a 3x3x4 design, which means that there are 3 types of focus, 3 syntactic positions, and 4 types of matrix verbs for a total of 36 conditions, which were multiplied for 12 lexical items. So in conclusion, we had 432 stimuli, which obviously, because of the big amount of stimuli, were divided into 6 lists using a Latin square design, and each informant saw 2 different lexicalizations for each condition. And as you can see here, for the information focus, for the informative focus, we had a context, then a WH question, and then the target sentence was actually the answer to the WH question. As for corrective focus, we had a context, then an assertion, and then the target sentence was the correction. And then finally, for the mirative focus, we had a context, and the target sentence was what the speakers say about it. So as we can see here, all these scores of the information on the informant scores were turned into Z scores and then analyzed through an ANOVA test. And this showed that the interaction between type of focus and syntactic position is highly significant. So specifically, all focus types are strongly preferred in situ, in Italian, and then there is no significant differences between constituent front-end the root clause or front-end the embedded clause, regardless of the type of focus. Also, the results show that the interaction between the type of focus and the type of matrix verbs is significant, as well as the relation between the syntactic position and the type of matrix verbs. In details, we see that the in situ position is preferred for all types of matrix verbs. There is no significant difference between the 4 types of matrix verbs. And importantly, sentences featuring an emotive active matrix verb were judged significantly worse when the focus was realized in fronted root position, regardless of the type of focus involved. So the first results show that all types of focus are strongly preferred in situ. However, the test was written. So informants could have judged the sentences based on the rules of written language, which at least in Italian, they might tend to discourage the dislocation of constituents. Also, since it was in written form, it only took into consideration receptive scales, so no production was taken into consideration. Then another result was that there is no difference between front-end root and front-end embedded constituents. So this seems to provide a counterexample to the interface root restriction. And finally, we saw the front-end root foci are significantly worse with an emotive active verb. And this seems to point toward an island-like nature of these verbs complement. So in order to resolve these issues, we did 3 follow-ups. We did an oral production test in order to verify if the preference for the in situ position is also maintained in oral production. And then we did a forced choice task in order to investigate whether a significant difference exists when speakers are actually forced to choose between a front-end root or front-end embedded focus constituent. And finally, we did an acceptability judgment test in order to verify this island-like nature of the complements of emotive active verbs. The pilot test for task 1 and task 2 was an experiment designed on the methodology proposed in the Stroh and Federman 2014, which we will see in detail in the next slide. And this pilot test was submitted to a small group of 12 informants, all of them also in this case of the Roman variety. The test presented a 3x3 design, so 3 types of focus, and combined with 3 types of matrix verbs. And in this case, the syntactic position was the dependent variable. And for each condition, we gave 9 lexical items, so for a total of 81 stimuli. Also in this case, we divided in 4 lists with a Latin square design, and the same lexicalization were used both for task 1 and task 2. And yes, informants saw different lists, obviously, for task 1 and task 2. So as for the production test, as I said before, we followed the Stroh and Federman 2014 design. So the item, each item was made of 4 parts. So we had a context, and then il tuo amico dice, so your friend says, which is an hypothetical question that your friends ask. And then there is the third part, which are the instructions that the informant had to follow. And then the part to dici, you say, which is just a blank line in which the informant is instructed to use, first of all, full sentences to answer, and he has to write this answer in the part in which is you saying the blank line, but importantly, only after uttering it. And this is done in order to avoid any interference of the written language rules. So as we can see here, for the informative focus, for the information focus, we have the context, and then your friends say, which is the question, and then the instructions are you have to answer saying il goulash, and then the part, the blank line with the answer. And then for corrective focus, we have the context, the question, and then the information that the instruction that the informant had to follow was you had to correct your friend saying il goulash. And then finally, for the mirative focus, we had the context and the question, what your friend says, and then the instruction was to answer to your friend with surprise. And the result of this test showed that also in oral production, the in situ position is still preferred. And the frontal focus is not significantly associated with any specific focus type, nor any specific matter verbs. So we can say that in Italian, the canonical position for all focus types is in situ, and movement of the focus constituent is not required for its interpretation. And now for the next 2 follow-ups, I will turn it over to my colleague, Giorgio Carella.
Thank you, Marco. So, turning to the fourth choice task, the design was the same as the one you just saw, but the items were made of only 3 parts, since the answer was already provided in the third part of this fourth choice task. The first part was, again, a context, providing information about the topic of the conversation, and then speaker A was the second part in which this fictional speaker would ask a question about the topic introduced in the context. And then in the third part, the speaker B's reply was reported. And again, this was labeled differently, which was answer correction or answer with astonishment, depending on the type of focus. Of course, speaker's B reply was always presented into 2 versions, one with a fronted root focus and the other one with a fronted embedded focus, so that informants had to choose between the 2 options. Here
5
is
minutes.
an example. Okay.
5 minutes.
Here we have an example with information focus. You see the context, then the speaker A question, and then the 2 answers with the small box that informants had to tick to choose between the 2. Results show that informants strongly prefer fronting in the matrix clause rather than in the embedded clause when they are forced to choose. So we have a preference, and there's no significant difference between any of the experimental conditions. So according to following the interface root restriction, when ex situ focus is preferred in the fronted root position. As for the final follow-up, we run a final acceptability judgment task to investigating this island-like nature of emotive-factive complements. And the design was a 2x4, testing the extraction from the complements clause of 2 types of verbs, bridge and emotive-factives, of 4 types of constituents: subject, direct object, indirect objects, and agents. The items were short dialogues between 2 speakers. The first would make an assertion, and the second would ask something about it, posing a biclausal WH question in which the WH element was extracted from the embedded clause. The goal of this final task was to confront extractions from emotive-factive complements with fully grammatical extractions, such as those from complements of bridge verbs, and also to investigate whether the different syntactic function of the extracted constituent might influence the acceptability of the sentence. Here you can see 2 examples. These 2 examples are the same in the context, in the first part, and also in the first assertion made by M, which is Mauro in this case. The question made by Cristina in the end is different. In the first one, you can see that there is an emotive-factive matrix verb, such as rallegrare, to make happy. In the second one, you can see a bridge matrix verb, such as to say in this case. So turning to the results, we can see that informants consider extraction from emotive-factive complements definitely less acceptable than those from complements of bridge predicates. And again, there's no significant difference between the condition involved. In this particular case, there's no significant difference between the different syntactic function of the extracted element. Therefore, we can say that these data do indeed support the analysis of emotive-factive complements as syntactic islands and provide an explanation for the lower acceptability of fronted root foci in this condition. So we can just briefly sum up the conclusions and make our own small proposal in order to explain what we saw. So first of all, again, the in situ position turns out to be the unmarked position for focus in Italian. Therefore, we cannot really talk about optionality. A movement of the focus constituent is not required for the interpretation of an element as the focus of the sentence. And considering movement as a last resort assumption, the main function of fronting must be linked to some other different interface requirement, which needs to be further investigated in future researches. Here we have a small proposal about this. Following Rizzi 2006 proposal, we assume that the head of the focus phrase is assigned the corresponding feature as it enters syntax, so directly in its first merged position. This feature gets visibility at the interfaces through an agree relation between a dedicated probe in the matrix C domain, labeled with a capital letter, depending on the different type of focus involved, and the in situ goal. This in a normal one closed sentence. If the DP is merged in an embedded clause, the agree relation is mediated by what Rizzi called a purely formal counterpart of the probe, which is labeled with a not with a capital letter, which is realized in the embedded C domain. And this formal counterpart mediates the agree relation between the probe in the matrix C domain and the goal in the embedded VP. Hence, when the focus element is indeed fronted, it moves by internal merge in the specifier of the focus position to satisfy some interface, some other interface requirement, which could be something like salience, as among others described by Kyarkos 2009 or Falk 2014. But again, this is left to future researches. So as for the other two results, again, when the ex situ focus is preferred in the fronted root position, which is consistent with what argued by Rizzi, that intermediate position cannot function as final position, and they are rather escape hatches through which elements must pass to reach higher positions. And indeed, this suggests that the fronted root position is the criterial position for the scope discourse property which triggers focus fronting. And finally, the extraction from emotive factory complements have been shown to be significantly worse than extraction from complements of bridge verbs, and hence we can say that emotive factory complements are qualified indeed as syntactic islands for a syntax semantic restriction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice talk. We do have, I think, questions. I'm not sure. Renato, do you have questions? Andres, I don't.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you for the talk. That was very interesting. I happen to be working on similar issues in Brazilian Portuguese, and I make a very similar claim to the one you made today, which is the locus of interpretation of focus in Brazilian Portuguese is in situ, and the movement of focus is driven by other interface requirements. So I've listed a few that license focus fronting in Brazilian Portuguese, and I would like to see whether similar effects are at stake in Italian as well. One is exhaustivity. Exhaustive foci are good fronted. Delinking foci within delinked DPs are good. And on the pragmatic side, effects like surprise, exclamation also facilitate focus fronting. So whenever something other than focus is at stake is when you can have focus fronting in Brazilian Portuguese. When you have just focus, regardless of the type, focus fronting isn't licensed. Is it the same that's going on in Italian? Do you have effects of that sort as well? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And as for exhaustivity and delinking, we haven't tested that, but actually it was something we were thinking about, especially exhaustivity. We were trying to work on an experiment to test that. As for surprise, we kind of tested it considering mirative focus, because mirative focus is especially designated to express the surprise about the
like counter expectations, unexpected, yes.
Yeah, the unexpectedness of the focus involved, but in this case, it was not influencing the rate at which focus was fronted. It was the results for mirative focus were completely comparable with information and corrective focus. So at least for Italian, surprise cannot, I'm afraid, cannot be counted between those factors that can trigger fronting.
It is, just to add something, it is true that surprise must have some role, just because when you test an answer with some tag, some exclamatory tag, something like, ma no, ma guarda, look at that, something like that, then it takes all the surprise and the rest of the sentence is completed also prosodically. You cannot really see nothing in there. So it for sure, when there is the element surprise and the element that expresses the surprise is somehow, silent. But it cannot be the full story. That's why we think that there is a combination of feature, and our future path now is to see the combination exactly with exhaustivity, with silence, but also silence is a concept that must be really strictly defined, otherwise it's too vague.
Yes.
So one should find a way to define formally what silence is, to be an operative notion. Otherwise it's just to say yes, I mean something like that, and vague things do not work quite well. But thank you for your question and your interest. And a comparison with Portuguese would be really very, very nice to make. Thanks.
Thank you.
Angel, do you want to make a short question?
Wow. I'll try to be as
You
short as
try,
possible.
okay.
Thank you very much, the three of you, for this wonderful talk. That is very, very interesting. As you know, I am very interested in that kind of topic. I have several questions. I have, I don't know. I mean, I would like to have more information in general about many different things or points that you have raised in your talk, but I will just make a quick question about the IRR rule. You know, at some points you mentioned that the data that you have obtained are a counterexample for the root rule
Restriction.
or yeah, exactly. It didn't come to my mind now. So yeah, the interface root transformation, because as far as I see, this interface root restriction will predict that there is no root transformation in many subordinate or embedded contexts. But what you have obtained now is that even in those root-like contexts that we are expected to allow for these transformations, they do not, I mean, in principle, speakers do not show preference for the fronting option of focus. Okay, so does this mean the end of the, I mean, the death of the interface root restriction as a concept? That is my question.
Marco, do you want to answer or no? Well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
No, I think that maybe also Giorgio with the follow-ups can answer this, because this was the preliminary result that showed that at least the preliminary results were going against this interface for restriction, but then we did some follow-ups that show that when they are forced to choose, the fronting constituent is preferred in the root clause, right? I don't know if Giorgio wants to add something.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, of course, the point you raise is, I mean, it's crucial. I mean, if the informants do not realize this root transformation in root-like context, where is the interface root restriction going? But but I think that of course root transformation are in principle okay, because for example, as we've seen with the first acceptability judgment test, there is no difference between the two positions. You can see here no significant difference at all between fronting in the root position or in the embedded position. But because everybody prefers to when it's in situ. But if they are forced to choose, I think that the metrics clause qualifies as a definitely a router context, if you may forgive this expression. So that that's what prompts them to prefer the matrix to the embedded clause.
Yeah, exactly. So the fact that there was no distinction, it was just because the in situ was the dominant one. So yeah, it would not appear the difference between fronted root and non and embedded clauses. But when they're forced, yeah, that is the crucial point. That preference is very clear, and if some speaker, but in not a significant way, leaves the element in the embedded position, then one can think of just an agree relation at that point, or some kind of feature inheritance. But anyway, those are positions that are not criterial. And so we think that the interface restriction is not dead. But what is crucial is that anyway, even though the fronted root position is endowed with illocutionary force, anyway, with these types of foci, speakers prefer the in situ position. So that is not
semantics.
enough.
Yeah, semantics is not enough to explain all the data. I mean, we need some sort of cumulative approach to the possible explanation of the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid that we must go on that direction.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we now have like 9 minutes and then we are back. So it's like a kind of very short break and then we are back. Okay, and then it's Ludovica. Okay, see you soon. Hi, Ludovica. You are already the co-host, right?
Yes, I think yes. I'm trying to share. Okay, can you see it?
I can't see it, but again, I also see in the left, I see the small slides.
Yes, but I will use a slideshow now, so I think it will be 1 second. Okay.
Okay, now it's good. But let's wait people to come back because I think we still have 1 minute.
Yes, yes, of course.
And I will let you know 5 minutes before the 20 minutes. So you still have, it's hard to explain those, yeah.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe we should start. What do you think? Yeah.
If you want, I can start. Should I start?
I think so.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. Today I'm going to present Andare su and Dire su, a syntactic proposal for a preposition and syntagmatic verbs of Veneto dialects. So firstly, a definition. A syntagmatic verb is a verbal form which is formed by the union of a verb, usually a matrix verb, and a particle, which can be prepositional or adverbial. We can have more transparent syntagmatic verbs like andare su, to go up, andare giù, to go down, portare fuori, to bring out, and so on and so forth, or more idiomatic syntagmatic verbs, for example, fare fuori, to kill, buttarsi via, to throw itself away, andare avanti, to keep something going. And these two kind of verbs can be in a meaning continuum in a different spectrum between the transparency and the idiomaticity. Regarding the Italian language, usually we are using the Simone definition of syntagmatic verbs. So we are talking about the syntagm formed by a verbal head followed by a complement, which usually is an adverb. So a particle, usually in this case, an adverb. The two elements of the verb are bonded by a strong syntactic cohesion, and usually these kind of verbs don't accept insertion of external elements. The syntagmatic verb can be transitive and intransitive, so they can accept the direct object or the indirect object. And we can find this kind of verbs in the standard Italian dialects and the regional Italian varieties, and we can see misvarse, mostly northern varieties. So the aims of the following work presentation is, the first is to show the behavior of the compositional syntagmatic verb, whose whole meaning is formed by the meaning of the matrix verb and the meaning of the particle, and of the idiomatic syntagmatic verb, whose whole meaning is not formed by the union and the bond between the meaning of the two elements of the verb. The second aim is to show how the verbal behavior changes due to the different features of the particle, which can be prepositional or adverbial. And the third aim is to use the focus operation as a test to show how the different features of the particle can change the way of moving of the elements of the structure. Regarding compositional and Benetton syntagmatic verbs, as I said before, the meaning of the matrix verb, which usually is a movement verb, is enforced by the meaning of the particle, which usually is a directional one. So, for example, we can have El se anda su sul tetto, he went up to the roof. In this case, the compositional Benetton syntagmatic verbs can accept the direct object or the PP constituent, but it's optional. And the particle can be firstly focalized by itself, but only if there isn't a complement. So we can't say su el se anda sul tetto, up he went to the roof. The particle can be focalized with the PP constituent. So, for example, su sul tetto el se andò, up to the roof he went. And thirdly, the particle can be isolated with the PP constituent. So, for example, dove se l'andà su sul tetto, where he's gone up to the roof. Regarding the idiomatic Benetton syntagmatic verb, in this case, the meaning is not formed as by the union of the matrix verb and the particle. So, for example, el zagamanya fora is K, is squandered all the money. The idiomatic syntagmatic verb of Benetton usually are a stronger lexical unit, so we can't insert any other different elements, external elements like adverbs, as we can see in the example. And the particle can only remain adjacent to the verb. So we can't focus the particle like in fora is K zigamanya, out the money he has ate. Fora il sirigamanya is K, out he has ate the money, or like come li galamanya fora, so how he ate them out. Regarding the preposition categories, there were different studies which proposed different theories regarding the categorization of preposition. So, for example, we have Jackendorf, which proposed the lexical category for the preposition with the verbs, the nouns, and the adjective. Or also Baker, Svenonius, and Cinque propose a functional category due to the fact that these elements show no morphological derivation and are few elements in a class. In general, we can say that simple prepositions are functional and complex prepositions are lexical. Regarding the particle and the PP, and regarding the point of view of this presentation, I'm quoting from Cinque. A simple preposition behaves as an add. It gives a case and it's a complement. It isn't a standalone domain of dependency. It resists to piping in some languages and to direct modification. A complex preposition presents the opposite feature, behaving as a modifier. So the fact that a preposition can show a simple and complex preposition can show features with opposite features can let us to think about that this preposition can have an hybrid in some way, an hybrid behavior in some way, more complex or more simple depending on the context. There were different work about German and Romance languages. So regarding the German languages, Federici and Litterfield found that usually participants with aphasia distinguished simple and complex preposition. But in Romance languages, Franco Zampieri and Stewart showed that learning people of Romance languages don't distinguish simple and complex prepositions. So the level of difficulty is the same, but for the learning of simple and complex preposition. So regarding the hybrid nature of the P features, we can say that simple and complex prepositions are the same categorical elements, but with different features. So some preposition could be prepositional or adverbial, depending on the features, like Nicole and Olsen also proposed. So we can think about a same projection for these elements, but a different way of moving depending on the features. And different studies proposed the same structure, but with different substructure depending on the kind of the preposition or the adverbial preposition, like cracked or cane, Garzani Rossi, Svenonius, or Jack and Dove. Regarding the Italian prepositional and adverbs, I'm quoting from Treccani. A preposition is an invariable element which defines the function of the following element, and an adverb is an invariable element which defines the verb meaning. So we can say that both the adverbs and the preposition define a feature of the element which they refer to. So again, we can think about that prepositional and adverbial elements can be of the same category, but with different features, so with different behavior in some way. Also, we can say that some prepositions are linked to other adverbial prepositions with the same meaning, like, for example, su and sopra. Su usually is more popular than sopra. It's more used in spoken Italian and can substitute sopra due to the fact they show the same meaning. So again, we can maybe speak about an hybrid behavior. Regarding the focus of the particle, different studies proposed a CP layer near the PP constituent due to the fact that, for example, as in we can see in Den Dicken, the preposition shares some features between with the verbs, the nouns and the nouns. Also, Kuhlmann proposed an adjacent preposition near to the PP constituent, and also Munaro and Poletto. So, regarding this presentation, I'm starting with a compositional syntagmatic verb. So we are starting with andare su, to go up. As I said before, andare su is a compositional directional syntagmatic verb. As you can see in the structure, there is a spec PRTP, which is a layer which was proposed firstly by Hurley and Neuer, and it justified the movement of the particle in the structure. In this case, the particle doesn't change the meaning of the verb, and its behavior is the behavior of a proper preposition. So it's directly modify the PP constituent. So in this case, we can think about the preposition and the PP constituent like a complex element, which is moved up to spec as P to modify the aspect of the verb. In the case of the focus in spec CP, so the particle and the PP constituent is moved up to spec CP layer as a complex element due to the fact that in this case, the prepositional present the particle present prepositional features and modify directly the PP constituent. So we can say that in this case, we can have su sul tetto as andà as a focus operation, so up to the roof we want. Now we are moving to andare fuori. Again, andare fuori is a compositional directional syntagmatic verb. We can see again that there is the spec PRTP structure in which the particle fora is directly merged up. Again, the particle doesn't modify directly the meaning of the verb, but in this case, the particle has adverbial features, but it behavior like a preposition in some way. So again, as behavior move su, as in the case of andare su, fora modify directly the PP constituent, and it is moved up to spec as P to modify also the aspect of the verb. And again, we have a complex element. But in the second case, so in the case in which fora behavior like an adverb. In this case, it is moved up to spec adverbial P, and it's also moved up to spec as P to modify directly the verb and the aspect of the verb. So in the first case, we have a particle which behaves like a preposition, and in this case, we have a particle which behaves as an adverb. Regarding the focus operation, in the first case, in which fuori is a preposition, the particle is moved with the PP constituent as a complex element in the spec CP layer. So we will have fora per la finestra si andò, so out of the window he went. And the goal and the action are directly focalized by the dislocated particle. But in the second case, in which fuori behaves like an adverb, the particle will remain firstly in spec adverbial P, and then in spec aspect P. And the PP constituent will move by itself in spec CP layer to complete the focus operation. So we will have per la finestra si andò fora, so out of the window, through the window he went out, or out of the window he went. Now we are moving to dire su, which is a non-compositional idiomatic syntagmatic verb. The meaning is to scold. So in this case, the particle modify directly the meaning of the matrix verb. In this case, the particle presents the proper adverbial features. So the particle is merged up directly in spec adverbial P, and it is moved up to spec as P to modify the aspect of the verb. As an adverb, in this case, the preposition, the particle, has a limited way of moving. And during the focus operation, the PP constituent is moved by itself in a spec CP, as you can see in the structure. And the particle remains in spec as P as an adverb.
5 minutes.
Okay. So we can see that in this case, the focus is only a Gianni e gadito su. So to Gianni, he has said up, to Gianni, he's called. So in conclusion, we can see that the preposition could have an hybrid nature. This structure could be used also for Italian due to the fact that also Italian, as I said before, presented the syntagmatic verbs, but with some differences that I didn't treat here. We can say also that different features means different way of moving of the elements of the structure, not only of the particle. Of course, the structure of the meaning context influence the expression of the feature of the particle, which are deep structure elements. So in the surface structure, the change of the features is demonstrated by the fact that there is a value change in the aspect of the verb also. The research hint are discovering which are these features and how to treat it, them theoretically speaking, and to treat them like in the structure, in the syntactic structure. And these are the references, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Ludovica. Very nice presentation. So we do have time for questions. And so we are open for questions.
Okay, sorry. Oh.
I don't know if we have time for questions. So if nobody has, I do have one question. Okay. Yeah. I just want to check if I understood what you were saying. So you were saying that su,
yeah,
which is a preposition for you.
So the fact is that these elements can be, as I hypothesized in some way, can be they are preposition, but they can present different features which can be prepositional or adverbial, depending on the context of the and on the meaning of the verb in some way. Actually, also the particle probably change not only the aspect but also the meaning of the verb. So at first they are preposition, but maybe after they acquire some features which are adverbial, depending on the meaning of the tense and of the verb.
So when you have andare su, it is prepositional.
Yes.
And if I understood you correctly, it really doesn't change the meaning of the verb.
In the case of andare su, in the specific case of andare su, like for movement verb, like going up, the particle doesn't change the meaning. But for example, in the case of andare su di giri, going crazy in some way, it changed the meaning of the verb. It totally changed the meaning of the verb. But also it is a matter of context of the tense. It depends probably on the verb and on the meaning, the whole meaning of the tense also.
Okay, because like, I'm going back to the andare, because andare su, because it gives you a different information in a sense, because andare su is different from andare fuera. I don't remember. You had this contrast between andare su, andare fuori.
Yes.
And they are different.
Yeah, they are different.
And so they are somehow interfering with the meaning of the verb, right? It's true that it's not the same with the other one, which is dire su, because then the whole verb is different. In a sense, yes. in the first two cases, the core meaning of the verb, let's say like this, doesn't change, although it's different to have one or the other.
No, the fact is that in the first two cases, the verb doesn't change at all its meaning. It only changed the aspect of the verb. So, for example, andare is only to go, but andare su is to go up. It's the different.
But then it's to go up, and the other one is to go out.
Yes, and the first one, yes.
So you have a meaning difference there. Of course, the meaning of movement, it is the same, right? In both cases.
Yes.
But then the direction of the movement is totally different, right?
Yes, and also the fact is that the particle present, it's different because su is a preposition, a proper preposition, basically talking, and fuori or fora, depending on Italian or dialect, is an adverbial preposition, is a different element. My thought is that probably the different features, the prepositional adverbial features of these elements probably change also not only the aspect, but in some way the meaning of the verb. And of course, it has to be deepened which are these features. But of course, I will take it as an hint, and I will think about it, about the different movement in some way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? We still have some time. If no, Fernando.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question regarding lexicalization patterns in Tell Me. When you were presenting this, I didn't know that in Italian you have this kind of thing, and it reminds me the lexicalization patterns of Tell Me, and it looks like that Italian is shifting in some way to I think to a verb frame language to a satellite language. Is something like that happening? That's my question. for observation.
Good question. I mean, these kind of verbs in Italian are present since centuries, so from the medieval age. So I don't think it's a matter of changing the type of the language, but I think that's it is an historical thing. We can say that in the northern part of Italy, the idiomatic verbs are more present than in the center of Italy and the south of Italy. But historically talking, these kind of verbs were always in Italian or regional varieties of Italian. I don't know if I answered to you. Okay.
Yes. For me, it's weird because Pablo and Romina can correct me, but in Spanish we don't have anything like that, so I didn't know about.
In Portuguese we have with but not with andare. Subir para cima e descer para baixo. We have those. Subir is to go up, and then you have the preposition. So you have like to go up, up, and then to go out, out, because sair is to go out. So we have this. And then in that case, in Brazilian Portuguese, I think you really don't have any change in the verb. That's why I was asking about andare in Italian, because it seems that in Italian, still the preposition gives some sort of meaning. But in Portuguese, because in Portuguese you have the verb subir, which is to go up, and then you say subir para cima, to go up, up. And then I think the preposition is not really doing anything there.
I don't know, probably I don't have the elements right now to respond and to give you an answer, but probably also the meaning of the verb does something, of course, in this kind of phrasal verbs in some way. I have to check about this kind of point of view. Thank you for having shared it with me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. If you don't have any more questions, see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And please take a look at the posters. You have the link for the posters there. Enjoy the posters, and we talk about the posters tomorrow. Okay. See you tomorrow.